We are live because we've got breaking news in the compound GLP-1 world. Listen, if you are somebody who relies on access to compounded GLP-1 medication, there is some news today from the FDA that is absolutely going to rock the compounding world. We're going to get into that all here in just a minute. We're going to get into why I think this is happening, what maybe triggered this, and what maybe some of the implications are. But before we do that, welcome. This is On the Pen. It is a patient-centric obesity medicine news platform. We bring you patient-centric obesity medicine news that empowers you to have more competent and confident conversations with your medical providing team. So we're going to get into this all here in just a moment here, but I want to give a little bit of backdrop for what I'm up to today. I'm down in New Orleans today, and we are doing some work with the Obesity Action Coalition, a education event here. So I've been tied up all day, and the texts started coming fast and furious about 20 minutes ago. And I'm going to read the letter from the FDA. Now, this is all on the heels of yesterday's Most Favored Nations announcement. All right. So, one of the things that we've been talking about here at On the Pen is the one thing we did not know about the negotiations that took place between the pharmaceutical companies and the Trump administration was what were the concessions that were made by the administration in terms of these medications. So they got a reduced cost for the medications. In Lilly's case, a very reduced cost, but a promise to release orforglipron at certain price points. We got Novo Nordisk, who brought down the price of Wegovy, and we didn't know what the concessions from these drug companies were. Well, maybe we've got a little bit of insight into that today based upon the FDA's response. Now, one of the other things that happened yesterday that can't be discounted is Hims and Hers Telehealth launched and very aggressively marketed, almost in a sense like to undercut the administration's announcement on Most Favored Nations, their own version of a semaglutide pill. Now, that is a whole separate story because one of the ways that Hims and Hers has marketed their compounded medications is the same active ingredient. The same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy. And they've been warned by the FDA in letters to stop doing that. Now, one of the things I've been talking about on X for months is they've never stopped doing that in their advertisements on the radio programs that I listen to. And they did not stop yesterday with the launch of their semaglutide pill that said on many of the advertisements across the social media landscape, same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy. Now, here's what the FDA said today in a statement. This is on the heels of a tweet yesterday from Marty Makary. But this is a statement directly from the FDA, Marty Makary, the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, and I quote, "Today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is announcing its intent to take decisive steps to restrict GLP-1 active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, intended for use in non-FDA approved compounded drugs that are being mass marketed by companies, including Hims and Hers and other compounding pharmacies as similar alternatives to FDA approved drugs. These actions are aimed to safeguard consumers from drugs for which the FDA cannot verify quality, safety, or efficacy. We take serious any potential violations of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The FDA is also taking steps to combat misleading direct-to-consumer advertising and marketing following warning letters that were sent in the fall of 2025. In promotional materials, companies cannot claim that non-FDA approved compounded products are generic versions or the same as drugs approved by the FDA. They also cannot state compounded drugs use the same active ingredient as the FDA approved drugs or that compounded drugs are clinically proven to produce results for the patient. The FDA will use all available compliance and enforcement tools within its authorities to address unsubstantiated claims and associated public health concerns. Entities engaged in the manufacture, distribution, or marketing of unapproved compounded GLP-1 products should be aware that failure to adequately address any violations may result in legal action without further notice, including without limitation, seizure, and injunction. End quote. So this is the letter that was put out by Marty Makary, the FDA's commissioner on compounded medications. So, what we have again to lay the landscape out is, and before we get farther into this, I want to welcome you all. We're doing this live stream. So, thank you for being here and thank you for being the best part of what we do. I have things that I have to get to, but I wanted to come on and share this breaking news with you. My ask, if you're watching on YouTube, down below, there's a button that says hype. Please hype this video. Hit that hype button. It helps other people to see this live stream. So, if you see that down below somewhere, use that hype feature. Also, if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and hit the thumbs up button. All of those things train the algorithm. That's the little Al Gore in the sky. You see him floating there. He's the little Al Gore in the sky, and you can train him by just liking, saving, sharing, commenting, all those things, and they train him. And then what he'll do is he'll deliver more of this content via his little computer to you. So train the algorithm. But that is essentially what's going on here with me today. I want to get into the landscape of what's going on. So yesterday, again, we had the announcement of the most favored nations. That is the direct-to-consumer pricing for prescription drugs that you can go to Trump RX and find a list of all the manufacturers that are providing cash pay options for some of their drugs, and you can link over to their cash pay programs. Now, that big announcement was made yesterday, and something that we've been talking about here at On the Pen for months is what were the concessions that they made in order to get those agreements. And one of the things that we posited here at On the Pen was that there could have possibly been some agreement that there would be some enforcement on the compounded versions. It appears that that's exactly what's happened today, that the FDA is going to crack down on API resources. Now, the other thing that I will say is that it can't be discounted that it could be purely coincidental based upon what happened with Hims and Hers yesterday, because Hims and Hers seemingly was ready to start a fight with the Trump administration on two levels, right? First, they sort of undercut this big announcement that the administration wants to make on the most favored nations. Basically, hey, we arbitrated the cost of the Wegovy pill that's $149. Now you can get, the same active ingredient as you get in Wegovy, which was $1,300 just a few months ago. Now you can get it for $149 up to $299 for the top dose. So those were the administration obviously wants to take a victory lap on those negotiations. And Hims and Hers comes out and says, hey, we got the same thing over here. We're making our own version. And guess what? It's cheaper. And it uses the same active ingredient, something that the FDA warned Hims and Hers back in the fall not to say about their compounds, which is interesting because it's almost like poking the bear. The API stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient. In this case, that would be semaglutide or semaglutide. So back in the fall of 2025, the FDA literally sent a letter to Hims and Hers that says, stop saying that your compounds are the same active ingredient as Wegovy and Ozempic. They did not stop doing that in their advertising. And then yesterday, when they rolled out this pill at the same time, on the same day that they were doing the Most Favored Nations announcement, their advertisements all over the internet included same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy. So I want to take this this letter sort of paragraph by paragraph and say what I believe is going on here. But I do believe that this could be some kind of combination of a promise on the administration's part to use the levers of the FDA to sort of crack down on compounds. But I also believe that this was largely set off, this firestorm was largely set off by Hims and Hers yesterday. So let's go with that first paragraph where it says, today the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is announcing its intent to take decisive steps to restrict GLP-1 active pharmaceutical ingredients. So what they're saying there is they are literally going to go after and use the powers that they control to go after the pharmaceutical ingredient, meaning wherever they're getting the medication, the source of the actual ingredient in the compounds, they're going to go after the source. Now, we've already seen the FDA do certain things in terms of developing a green list of approved API vendors. This is basically saying that they're going to take decisive steps to restrict them. Okay. And it goes on to say intended for use in non FDA approved compounded drugs that are being, and then it's specific, mass marketed by companies, including Hims and Hers and other compound pharmacies. So it specifically calls out Hims and Hers in response to some of the public statements they made and the announcement that they made yesterday. As similar alternatives to FDA approved drugs. Again, these drugs are no longer in shortage, so they're relying on the custom doses, custom formulations that patients may require that are not available in the commercial forms, but they cannot make essential copies. These actions are aimed to safeguard consumers from drugs for which the FDA cannot verify quality, safety, or efficacy. I want to camp out on that statement because this announcement tends to lead me to believe that it's a combination of what Hims is doing, but the public nature about by which they're going after this tends to make me believe that this was part of a pharmaceutical negotiation over most favored nations. Because listen to this: the actions are aimed to safeguard consumers from drugs for which the FDA cannot verify quality, safety, or efficacy. That's exactly what pharmaceutical companies have been saying for 2 years. And these copies were fine during the shortage, but all of a sudden, on today, February 6, 2026, the day after Most Favored Nations was announced, all of a sudden the FDA has to come to our defense. They have to come defend us against drugs that they cannot verify quality, safety, or efficacy over. That is very fascinating to me because the timing is interesting. Don't you think that if there was a problem with the quality, safety, or efficacy of compounded medications, that the time to act was 2 years ago or a year ago or any time before today? So that means one of two things. Either they're going after all compounds because they agreed to this or they could be being specific about the Wegovy pill here because the Wegovy pill, or sorry, the compounded version of the Wegovy pill, compounded semaglutide pills, cannot verify quality, safety, or efficacy because they are not orally bioavailable and they don't use the SNAC technology that was used in the clinical trials for semaglutide. But as many of you know, if you follow On the Pen, a compounded version can never make a claim. A compounded version of any drug can never make the health, safety, and efficacy claims that the FDA approved versions make because compounds are not FDA approved by nature. We take seriously any potential violations of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That's the act that was passed by Congress in 2013 that essentially established 503A and 503B pharmacies and lays out the parameters by which a company can market and sell compounded versions of drugs that are currently under patent. So all of that's laid out in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which means here in this statement that the FDA is going to be looking for violations. And I assume that there are going to be some specific targets of that enforcement, and it sounds like Hims and Hers is one of them. The FDA, moving on to the next paragraph, the FDA is also taking steps to combat misleading direct-to-consumer advertising and marketing following warning letters that were sent in the fall of 2025. Now, that's what I alluded to earlier. Hims and Hers was on the receiving end of letters from many people were. Many telehealth companies, compounders were on the receiving end of these, but Hims and Hers is the most prominent that was on the receiving end, and they never addressed the specific issue of stopping basically saying that their compounded versions use the same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy, which I believe is what they're calling out here in this letter. Moving on, in promotional materials, companies cannot claim that non-FDA approved compounded products are generic versions or the same as drugs approved by the FDA. We just went over that. They also cannot state compounded drugs use the same active ingredient as the FDA approved drugs or that compounded drugs are clinically proven to produce results for patients. That's specifically what was in the Hims and Hers letters. I don't have it here with me because I'm on the road, but we gave that to you way back when it came out in the fall, that Hims and Hers was specifically warned on the area of stating that compounded drugs use the same active ingredient. With semaglutide specifically, the compounded version is made from a salt form that is made from a chemical synthesis. Whereas the FDA approved version from Novo Nordisk is actually made from a recombinant process using yeast, whereby the proteins are extracted. It's a totally different manufacturing process. So it is not the same active ingredient. And the FDA is saying here in this letter, you cannot say that. Now, the last paragraph goes on to say the FDA will use all available compliance and enforcement tools within its authorities to address unsubstantiated claims and associated public health concerns. Entities engaging in the manufacture, distribution, or marketing of unapproved compounded GLP-1 products should be aware that failure to adequately address any violations, again, sort of calling out the violations that they warned them about in 2025, may result in legal action without further notice, including without limitation, seizure, and injunction. So here's what you've got. You've got the latter part of this letter really being specific, I believe, about some of the infractions on the part of hims and hers, right? So I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that some sort of crackdown on compounding was coming based upon the things we don't know about the most favored nations negotiations, but that is all 100% just conjecture, hearsay, right? It's not rooted in fact, but it's just what a lot of people are out there sort of theorizing. Now, it's very easy to draw a line in the other 90% of this letter to hims and hers. First of all, they call out hims and hers specifically, but second of all, we know that letters were sent to hims and hers specifically warning them about the compounded drugs and marketing them as the same active ingredient. We know that they have not stopped that. And we know that as early as yesterday, when they launched the semaglutide compounded pill, that they were using that in their advertisements, saying same active ingredient. This was reported ad nauseum by Him's House over on I shouldn't say ad nauseum, but I saw it multiple times today from Him's House over on X. So that is the news today. That is a massive update. We have an article over at On the Pen. If you want to see this letter specifically from the FDA, go to otplinks.com. I have this in our links, so you can go there and read this article for yourself. Of course, we put a letter on on our Substack as well. So if you go to obesity.news, you can sign up for email alerts. You would have got this in your inbox before we even went live. So that's what's going on. I'm going to take a couple minutes because, again, I am on a work trip down. I'm in New Orleans. Let's see here if I can. So that's the background of the hotel that we're at. It's actually Mardi Gras right now, so very interesting festivities down here in New Orleans. But I wanted to take just a moment to answer some questions because I did see some in the comments here. One from Sue the Dude, he said, late, does this apply to compounded pill or all GLP-1 compounds? Sort of what we're trying to untangle here, Sue. But I think that they're going to be looking out for some of the worst offenders. You know, it's interesting. If you watched on our channel yesterday, we gave you an update on a lawsuit between Eli Lilly and Willow Health. And in that video, essentially what I said is echoing what the judge in that case said, is that the decision to enforce on this stuff belongs with the FDA. So this is within the FDA's parameters to police and govern. It's actually incumbent upon them that they do. The one thing that I do call into question is the timing of it, right? That's why this may be isolated to the pills, because that's what we saw happen yesterday. So I think it's sort of like one of two theories. It's either about the pills and in direct response to the pills and specific to hims and hers, or this was always sort of part of the plan that after the most favored nations website was live and all those negotiations, that they would get more serious about cracking down on them. It could also be a combination of the two, but that's sort of where we're at right now. Sue the Dude says, Dave, a few of us were late. Can you rehash the main points? Yes, absolutely. The main points here are essentially the FDA, after a stern tweet from Marty McCarr yesterday, warning that that there could be some forthcoming enforcement by the FDA on compounds. A specific letter was published today by the FDA. Again, the link to that is in at otplinks.com. So you can go there and you can check that out at otplinks.com and read it for yourself. But the main points of the letter from the FDA are that the Food and Drug Administration are taking decisive steps to restrict GLP-1 active pharmaceutical ingredients that are intended for use in non-FDA approved compounded drugs. Now, there's probably a lot in the community that are saying that that the customized doses and custom formulations will be safe. I think there's an argument to be made because it says that they will enforce based upon non-compliance with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act does give space for compounders to compound for personal needs and personal uses. This could be in response to the pill specifically, but we'll have to see, and we'll continue to follow this closely. We are down at a Obesity Action Coalition thing. We're trying to listen. The main thing that I've been trying to do for the last 2 years is advocate to get broader access to these medications, so we don't even have to worry about compounds, so that everyone would have access to the branded medications. I have given my time, my money, my energy to doing everything I can do in my little corner of the world to advocate so that this is the case, right? But I do know that many in our community rely on compounds, so that's why we're bringing you this news today. But I find it ironic that here I am down here with the Obesity Action Coalition, an organization that I have worked with to try to help expand access to the branded medication. So like in an ideal world, we're successful at that and everybody gets access to the branded medication. There's never any shortage and nobody really has to worry about compounds, right? But this is where we're at. So another question from Shelly. She says, so if this crackdown happens as they say, what happens to the people in the middle who will lose access? What if the prices come down further, putting a kid through college and can't afford direct price? So we do know that the administration has said that the prices on all the GLP-1s will be coming down to $250 within the next 24 months. And they said that back in the fall. So sometime within the next, 18 to 20 months, we should be expecting additional reductions in price, right? So, I don't think ultimately that they're gonna pull some sort of legal rabbit out of a hat that exists now that didn't exist 3 months ago or 4 months ago and be able to thwart all compounding in terms of custom doses and custom formulations. But so much of this remains unseen. We're sort of in uncharted territory because we haven't seen much FDA enforcement on compounds at all. And so what even levers do they have to pull, I think, is a big question that has to be answered and remains to be seen. But these are sort of the answers that we have today. I don't see any other questions. If you do have a question, drop it in the comments really quick. I've got a couple more minutes here. Hims and Hers going to have to spend a bunch of money changing their upcoming Super Bowl ads. I don't think their upcoming Super Bowl ads had a lot to do with compounded GLP-1s though, like they did last year. So I could be wrong. I haven't watched it. So we'll have to see what happens with their Super Bowl commercial. But breaking news today, make sure that you go over to our Substack and put your email address in there so that you can get access to these articles when we publish them. Again, we published an article just a few minutes before we went live here. You can also get the link to the actual FDA letter at otplinks.com. That's why we leave this up here, otplinks.com. You can find that letter there. That's what I got for you today. That's the update. Wanted to bring you into the fold on what's going on here, and we'll be following this closely from Nolens, where it is Mardi Gras, and I think we're going to watch a parade tonight, so that should be kind of fun. And we'll see what happens. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. Subscribe over to that Substack. right away, and make sure you stay on top of all this information, and make sure you follow me on Twitter, because Twitter is actually the first place that I had this. So if you're on Twitter, if you're on X, Man on the Pen is the account over that, at Man on the Pen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. Couldn't, wouldn't, shouldn't do it without you. Thank you for being here. We'll catch you on the next one.